You remember that Elijah had the dueling altar experience where the nation of Israel was being, especially the northern kingdom, was being influenced by the Phoenicians and by Jezebel and Ahaz, who was the king of the northern 10 tribes, and they were worshiping Baal openly, and they had hundreds of prophets and priests of Baal, and finally, and Elijah's the prophet of the day, and finally Elijah says, all right, let's do it. Let's have a smackdown right here. You guys build an altar however you want to build it. I will build an altar according to the Lord's design. We'll put sacrifices on the altar. You call on your God to rain down fire from heaven and consume the sacrifice. I will call on the Lord God, Jehovah, to rain down fire and consume the sacrifice. And whichever God actually does it, well, that must be God. And you remember the story, the prophets of Baal get all psyched out about this, and they go through all their machinations and all their weird stuff, and they start crying out and stuff, and they're dancing around and jumping around, and nothing's happening. And then Elijah begins to taunt them and says, maybe you need to go. Why don't you do it a little louder? Maybe he's busy. Maybe he can't quite hear you. And they start going into a frenzy, and they start cutting themselves with knives and so forth, and doing all this stuff. And I think it lasted half the day. It was hours long they're doing this, and nothing happens. And Elijah says, all right, it's my turn. First of all, although we're on the last day of a 3-year drought, would you please go get some huge jars? And when we say jar, we're not talking about the little canning jars that I'm making sauerkraut and pickles and stuff right now. So, not one of those little canning jars, but like one of those big jugs. Let's fill up a bunch of those and bring them in, and let's pour it over the dry wood and sacrifice on the altar. Just so there's no question about the fact that this didn't just spontaneously combust because it's so dry. And they do that 3 times. He calls on the name of the Lord. And the Lord sends down fire from heaven, which consumes the sacrifice, the wood, the stone altar. So this is some hot fire. And then he leads these 400 false prophets down to a nearby stream, and he slaughters them in the name of the Lord. And then the next day, turns out that Jezebel, the queen, hears about this happening, and she says, I'm going to make the same thing happen to that guy. She swears an oath, saying, as I live, that guy's going to go through exactly what all those prophets did. And here's Elijah, who stands up to the whole nation and says, come on, let's do it. Let's see who is God. And he slaughters all these guys and stuff, but Jezebel says, oh no, I'm going to get you. And he runs miles and miles and miles away from the northern part of the land to the southern part of the land, and he hides out in a cave. And when the Lord calls on him, that's where this quote comes from. Wah, 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 I'm the only one. Pastor Joe calls this the Elijah complex. He says a lot of people have this. I'm the only one who's ever gone through this, Lord. Nobody else knows the trouble I've seen. Right?